I don't think I even realized that I was spiraling until I was out of the storm. I think I was doing things just to try to white knuckle it through, but I could see it. I could see the decline happening. It wasn't me. It wasn't who I knew I was on the inside, and that I think was because I had lost my connection with God. And I think in hindsight, that was him showing me like, okay, this is with me and this is you without me. Which one do you like better? And it was very clear that it felt a lot better when I was connected with him, but I didn't know how to get out of it. And it wasn't until it came to like a breaking point that I was like, okay, let's rewind it, reel it back in, you know.
What's going on, guys? Welcome to An Invite to Peace. I am your host, Chad Campese. How are you? Really? How are you? Let me know. You can reach out to me via Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and my email is in the show notes. Actually, all those links are in the show notes. I am not hard to get a hold of. Hey, actually, one more thing that's in the show notes that I probably should have mentioned a while back, as some guests have mentioned it, but I have not. I wrote a book a while back. It's called Confession of a Christian Fraud, about my own spiritual experience, transformation, restoration. Maybe one day I'll talk about it here. One day. But if you want to know my backstory, why I do this, how this all started out, what the deal is, the link is in the show notes also. Again, the book's on Amazon, Confession of a Christian Fraud. If you grab a copy, let me know what you thought. I'm always up for connecting, and I'd be interested to hear what you had to say. But now on to today. How do you beat depression? How can you heal from grief and the beatdowns of life? Why does God matter? Why do you need to connect with Him? Does it even make a difference? Is it worth it? Will God come through? A.K. DeZanti has much to share about her anger, expectations, and lost connections with God, her own spiritual experience dealing with and overcoming depression, healing from grief, and how God led to transformation in her own life. Also, what she had to finally do to make sure she could actually hear what God was saying and where He was leading. She provides a lot. I don't need to say much more than that. And there's nothing more important to hear than the last question that I asked her, based on her knowledge and experience as a former police officer, as a current personal coach, speaker, and author. They say God works. He speaks through others. And this is one time where I think you'll hear in the conversation, I think you'll hear through her words, that this is no doubt exactly that. And it might just be exactly what you need to hear. A.K. DeZanti. All right, we are here this evening with A.K. DeZanti. How are you?
I am great. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I appreciate you coming on. We are going to do it a little bit differently tonight. Usually we start with the dark times, the times when it all went wrong. We're going to go back a little bit and just try something a little bit different. Mostly a curiosity, along with being a woman and a police officer, because I've never really picked anybody's brain on that, but I've always been curious. So, woman, cop, what was going through your head when you thought this might be a good thing? Like, what were you looking for? What kind of, how did that come about?
I mean, in order to think that it was possibly a good thing, I got to have something a little bit off, right? But no, I never honestly considered the female aspect to be different. I mean, I guess I recognized it, but the way I grew up, I was just such a tomboy that it just felt right. It just felt normal to jump into a role like that. But early on, I mean, I started my law enforcement career when I was just 19. So I was really young. And what I was doing was I did a couple years of undercover online investigations. And in that role, they really needed me. They needed a decoy. They needed somebody to do controlled phone calls. They needed somebody's picture that they could use, like from high school or whatever. and they needed some insight. And so I kind of jumped right into a role where I was really valued. And so I don't know that I have the typical beginning of a female law enforcement
Oh,
officer. At
gotcha.
least in conversation, I've heard that, not everybody has that experience. So I was very fortunate in that regard. I have always had this really strong sense of justice. I don't
Oh,
know if
okay.
it was like being an only child and like
Yeah,
everything has to be fair. And I don't know, maybe that's not an only child thing, but I just always, what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. And um, I didn't really, I went into college not knowing exactly what I wanted to do. Um, Started diving more into the legal realm and then discovering um, investigations and things like that. And that first gig, that undercover gig, that was before I ever even went to the academy. And
oh, okay.
I shadowed there initially, and I was hooked immediately. And I was like, okay, what do I have to do? What are the steps? Tase me, OC spray me, do whatever you got to do. I want in. And so yeah, that it just something inside of me was like, I have to fight for good in this world. And
That was the way
that's
you wanted to do it.
what drove it.
Okay. So we've all been there. Most of us have been there, that mountaintop, that college degree completion, the academy completion, that thing that we wanted, we knew we wanted. We wanted to start off our life and start in that direction. We finally achieved it. You finally achieved it.
I got hired on as a special deputy for a while because I wasn't old enough to actually get a commission
Oh,
yet.
that's true. 21, right? Yeah.
So yeah, so they kind of like held my spot, and they said, we want you to graduate from college. And so I will never forget it. I graduated and on a Saturday, and that Monday I went for an actual paid position, not just as a special deputy, and started as a deputy sheriff. And they started me in the courthouse, and I had the shift that nobody wanted. I had to go open, every day at 7 a.m. and do the perimeter checks and all of those things. But it was a really good experience, and I was happy to do it. It was that fire was like burning very strong at that point. And so it just felt like every day was like a sense of mission. Like, gotta gotta
Yeah.
go check all the closets and corners and everything in this old courthouse. And
Yeah.
um,
Well, tell me a little bit about that fire. What did you're doing this, you're checking the closets, you're checking the courthouse. You know that in the future there are things you want to accomplish. There are things you have in your mind of it's going to be like this. This is what I'm going to do here, and this is what I'm going to do at these certain years, and this is what I want to have my career give back to me. What were some of those things that you were thinking and feeling during that time?
well, I definitely wanted to work my way up to road patrol. And at the time, I think I was just kind of letting letting God guide me, I think, because I just didn't know what the opportunities were. I didn't know what the possibilities were. I did want to continue to work in undercover online investigations. I knew I wanted to get on Marine Patrol, which I ended up doing. I wanted to start like a mounted unit, like a horse patrol unit,
Oh,
and that
nice.
didn't really go anywhere.
No.
But and I had actually talked to the sheriff about starting an undercover unit there. So I had a lot of big goals, and I didn't realize that uh, they were very small fish to the bigger organization. But I thought I was coming in guns a
Yeah.
blazing, and gonna change the world. So
Awesome. Well, you mentioned God in there a little bit. Can you just throw me your kind of faith story up to that point? Not like a deep, background, but just kind of what did it look like coming out of the academy, or what did it look like in your childhood as far as faith was concerned?
um, God was always a part of it. I grew up going to church so my parents divorced when I was 10, and I would go to church when I was with my dad, and like regularly, and then sometimes with my mom as well. But I chose at 13 to get baptized. I just felt um, a pull, like just this gravity of like, let me solidify that I believe and I want to follow Jesus, and I want to um, be that same force for good in the world. And I had a couple of times in my teens where my faith really wavered. A couple times I was really, really mad at God. One being when my best friend at 17, we were best friends since we were 4, died by suicide. And I was really angry. And then just a couple years later, went into this realm of undercover online investigations and whatnot. And at the time that I was like in the academy, uh, I feel like my faith kind of got renewed. Like I had a purpose again. And I was like, okay, maybe this is some kind of redemption for her, you know?
Can you
Mhm.
tell me again? Anger is, a lot of times just us not receiving what we thought we were going to get. It's a lack of expectation. So, what was it about that situation that made you so angry at God specifically? Do you have a
Oh.
tab on that at all, or
Yeah. The year before, I had switched schools. My mom got remarried and we switched school, or I switched schools. And there were a lot of things that went on in that year that I was unaware of. And I was mad at the situation because and I know now that this isn't truth, but I thought that if I hadn't switched schools, that I could have seen something, said something, and maybe saved her. Um, I
oh,
know
so
now that
you left the school that she was at and went somewhere
yes,
else? Okay, I see.
yes.
Gotcha.
And I know now that if it could have happened any other way, it would have. And I still don't completely understand his plan. But uh, I was very angry because I was an only child and that was my best friend. So that was the closest thing I had to his sister. And I didn't understand it. And I still don't, but I have the ability now to trust him.
Gotcha. Okay, so then we're going to go back to your graduated the academy. You're checking the courthouse doors. You have all these plans, all these things that you think you're going to change the world and make this happen, and it's going to be
Of course.
awesome. And I'm sure some of those, to a point, came true. What did those next few years look like? Obviously, you got on the road at some point. I'm assuming, right?
I did. So the bulk of my career was on road patrol on afternoon shift. And it was so much fun.
Yeah.
I I just fell into this groove. Um, we had a we had a really good shift, uh, and it the synergy between all of us, and we would just fall into our sectors, and there was good communication, and everybody, like, it just felt right. But my day to day, I was so focused on being the best that I could be. So I would wake up every morning, go to CrossFit and or Muay Thai, and then come back and make my lunch and,
Protein
focus
shake.
in
Protein
on,
shake in there somewhere.
I'm sure, yes,
Yeah.
pre-workout too, yes.
Yes. Okay.
And then I would about 2:30 start suiting up, and you know and eventually towards, when things got to get a little wonky, it was more towards like 3, and then I was later and later and later. um but I was 4 p to midnight, and it was a really, really fun shift. Everything was in progress. I really felt like I was on top of the world. I mean, I felt nearly invincible, which I think was probably part and parcel to my detriment. I can only imagine because um, it just all felt too good. And then I think I started cutting corners and kind of ignoring um, the fact that I was experiencing some pretty traumatic things. And I was like, yeah, whatever, it's part of the job. We're tough. We shake it off and we keep moving, right? And um, yes, that's true. But also, we have to deal with them. And they eventually built up on me.
You mentioned faith as far as you started to, I don't know if you started to get back into it when you said that you started the academy and back into the job. You were like, maybe God's okay. Maybe this might. Can you explain that a little bit more to me? What did that look like going into the job then? Was it just a belief that was coming back? Had you started attending a church? Is it something where maybe you had a significant other or something that was kind of bringing you into it? What did that look like?
Yeah, actually, I'd forgotten about that. But initially, it took a little while to warm back up to everything. But like, I started carrying, I have a little coin that says, it was then that I carried you. And on the other side, it has the footprints. And so I always put that in my vest. And I started coming around to it. And then I dated a guy for about 3 years. Who was heavily involved in his church. And I started going every Sunday as well. I even taught the adolescent Sunday school there for a little while.
Oh, nice.
And so I was getting back into it, but that is the point I think where things began to fragment for me because truthfully I was living a double life. Um, I was going out to the bars and drinking and like just whooping it up with my friends. And then just a few hours later, then teaching adolescent Sunday school. And it just, I knew in my heart that it wasn't aligning. But I just kept doing it because I was numbing certain things but still trying to like strive for this relationship with God. And I had lost my balance there for sure.
Gotcha. You mentioned um, those calls, those situations started stacking up a little bit. Some people have these big calls that really affect them. Some people talk about just the 1,000 tiny paper cuts that add up over time. It sounds like maybe yours was some big ones. Is there one in particular that stands out that really kind of, if you could be a little descriptive and just kind of talk to us about that call and kind of where that took you?
It was actually about this time of year, January. Uh, we were experiencing like a blizzard, and the admin was like, okay, we don't want you out patrolling, but we want you visible. So go find a place to park and don't be a liability. So
Gotcha.
I
Been
was
there.
going,
Yes.
yeah, I was going to my favorite place to park. And as I was pulling up to that area, and I was right there, directly across the road from it was a car flipped in the ditch, and there were cars backing up. And I was like, I couldn't see that car yet. And I was like, what's going on? And so um, I was able to pull over just enough to see what was going on. And I flipped my lights on and I called it out and uh, pulled around everybody and got up there. And I hear somebody yell, there's a baby in the car. And I didn't even grab my jacket. I didn't grab my gloves. I just bolted out of the car. And so, of course, I mean, I'm sure you've been on crash scenes where it's just like there's stuff everywhere, there's dingers going off, there's,
Chaos. Yeah.
yes. And the horn was blaring, and like it was just so much going on. There's people running up to me. How can I help? And I'm like, I just got here. Like, just stand back. Right. Um, And so the it would have been the driver's side door, the entry, the frame to the door was smashed pretty good. And the mom had gotten herself unbuckled, and it looked like she turned around to get the baby unbuckled, got the baby out of the car seat, but then lost consciousness with the baby underneath her. And I was like, ugh, okay, I've got a decision to make because I know we're trained, we don't touch them. right? We don't, unless there's like, unless it's on fire, like we wait for EMS, whatever. And I was like, no, this is not an option at this point. So I crawled in the car. There was I'll never forget it. He was an older black gentleman, reminded me of Morgan Freeman. And he was like, what you need, ma'am? Like, I'll help you, like, whatever you need. And I said, help me get her out. And so I had to crawl over her, get in the passenger seat, which was now up under the driver's seat. And I mean, she was completely unconscious, so literally dead weight. And I pushed her up and out, and he pulled her out. And then I got the baby and crawled back out. And um, the baby was not crying, was not like, just kind of like in and out. And I kind of like, not on her sternum, but I rubbed her back a little bit, and finally she kind of came to and started screaming, and I was like, oh, thank God. Like,
Yeah.
never been so happy to hear a baby scream. And so somebody came with an emergency blanket and got mom wrapped up until fire trucks and squads arrived, and then they loaded everybody up, and I started directing traffic. And older, I guess he was older, another unit who was somewhat of a mentor for me, he pulled up and he said, go get in your car. And I said, no, I'm good, I got this. And he's like, go get in your car and warm up, I've got traffic, just
Oh, that's right.
like,
You ran out without jacket, without glove, without
right.
anything. Yeah.
I had no idea, like, I didn't feel a thing, right? And so I did. And when I sat in the car, I was like, what just happened? Because I didn't think mom was going to make it. And so I thought that this baby just lost her mom. And I looked down, and there was like, what I could only guess was like urine all over my uniform, and like little blonde curly hairs in my duty gear. And like, there's
Oh,
just stuff everywhere. And so I asked my sergeant if I could go home and change, and he was like, yeah, no problem. And I remember going home, changing, coming back into the squad room, and one of my guys was sitting there doing a report, and he said, how's it feel to be a hero? And I was like, I can't hear that right now. And I told him what was going on, like with the baby, and he had heard it all on the radio. And he said, she'll be all right. God loves children. And I was like, okay. um, And so quite a while went by, and I never heard what happened. The trooper was there was a trooper that came after the fact and took the report, or he did like the actual report. And I tried to get in touch with him to get an update, and I never could. And then about 5 or 6 months went by, and I was dispatched to take a report of a burglary. And I was standing in the driveway, and she hands me her ID. And I looked at it, and I looked at her, and I looked at it, and I looked at her, and I said, were you in an accident in January? And she goes, oh, yeah, I almost died. How'd you know that? And I said, I'm the one that pulled you out. And she was like, oh my God. And she about tackled me to hug me. But just at that point, my sergeant was pulling in and thought she was trying to attack me. So that,
oh man,
I had to,
that
yeah,
could
I
have
had to
gone
tell him
badly.
that
Yeah.
it's a friendly, it's okay, we're good.
Yeah.
But her and her daughter were both fine. She spent some time in the ICU and had to have like 3 surgeries, but she was okay. And it was just, that one sticks out so much because I was at the right place at the right time. I wasn't supposed to be anywhere else. There was nobody on shift at that time, police, fire, or otherwise, that would have been able to fit into that crevice of the car, except for me. So my 5'2" stature really came into handy that day. And it just, it wasn't until the second call when I actually got to speak with her that my faith was really renewed. It was that in between time was brutal. I thought about it every day.
So between that, you're saying speaking to her at that house really brought you back to a presence of there is a plan, there is a God, there is somebody directing, and but before that, in between, you're still kind of in that limbo phase of being angry and not sure and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And that there were several calls within that year that were big ones that made me come up with a lot of questions for him. And, but that was one moment where I got to experience some closure and got to experience that, you know, miracles can happen because I thought she was gone.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so we have the one side of it where we have our faith is renewed. He's here. Something's going on. And then we have the other side you just mentioned where there are a lot of calls where it's like, what is going on? Why are you doing this? Why are you allowed? Whatever your questions were, that's what I'd like to know. So give me one call if you would on really what brought you to a point that you're questioning what those questions are and kind of what that looked like in that moment or that call.
Well, one of those other calls was probably less than a mile up the road from the one I just told you. But there was a 15-year-old who had just gotten her permit 3 days prior. Her dad was in the passenger seat, and I can't honestly remember if it was two or three of her little sisters were in the back seat. And their driveway went across railroad tracks. And there's no crossing signals because it's just a driveway. And there's a bend on the north side of the driveway for the tracks. And she started to go across the tracks and realized that there was a train coming and froze. Brand new driver. Tried to back up, but they don't know if she accidentally hit it in neutral or just couldn't move quick enough. And it hit the truck on the driver's side. And so her dad and her sisters were pretty beat up, but she didn't make it. It flipped the truck a few times. And then while we were on scene, her mom, who lived in the apartments about half a mile away, showed up. And I got to be the lucky one to share the news with her.
So then you do what you got to do. We all do what we have to do during those calls. Get it done. Pack it in for the night, for the day, whatever that looked like. What went through your mind as far as faith was concerned, God was concerned? What did those next moments look like as obviously you're leaving or wherever you were at when you start to actually reflect on what actually happened?
I think at that point I just went numb. There had been such a buildup. And I think at that point I had created an indifference in my faith and was like, yeah, well, he might be there, but there's still a lot of evil in this world and I don't know how we can combat it. I was losing hope and creating this very cynical attitude. I don't know that I ever stopped believing, but there were definitely times where I became indifferent. And I think that's a scary place to be.
Absolutely. Well, the kind of the direction I'm going, or that we're going, I guess, in the future here, is those kind of give up moments that we have to give up and kind of figure out we're at an impasse, whether it's indifference or wherever we're at in our lives. And we've got to say, I can't either do this anymore. God, you've got to take it over, and kind of let him lead from there and what that looks like. So I'm curious with that call in the years progressing on, if you give me a little bit of an idea, what was that? What year was it that you were an officer when that happened? As far as how many years you had in, and where that was kind of trending.
I think I had probably 5 or 6 years in when that happened. And that was probably within the last 2 years of my career,
Gotcha.
the full-time career.
Okay. So then take me into where that takes you mindset wise, job wise, outlook wise, and kind of let's get to moving into that period where, look, I got nothing else, Lord. You got to fix this. You got to do something. I need you here, or this is going to go really bad.
Yeah. I think at that point, I just had this sense of like, I don't have any control of anything, because like recognizing that he was in control, but also not trusting not trusting his plan or his capabilities. And so it sort of started to spiral like, well, if I'm not in control, he's in control. What am I even trying for? Right? Like, just, and at that point, that really affects like your self-worth and your self-respect, um, your self-esteem. And I just started slacking off. And I think part of it was I was having, like cognitive issues. I was having difficulty concentrating. I was having all these health problems, um, depression, PTSD, and all of it was stemming from burnout. But I think it was compiling because I was also losing faith. And so it was just kind of like this perfect storm. I was isolating, and it didn't look like it on the outside because I was always like partying and doing things. But like when it came down to it, like I wasn't confiding in anybody about anything. And so there's this level of isolation that it's kind of like this middle ground that people have a difficult time recognizing, because if you see people out socially, or if you see them talking to people during work or whatever, you don't recognize that they might be isolating. But truly, if you're not confiding in anybody about anything below the surface, that's still isolation. And so having like this sense of helplessness, really spiraled my burnout to the point where I just didn't even want to be here anymore.
Do you think you could have controlled it yourself without God's intervention? Did you try to do that yourself at some point during that spiral where you're like, I can do this. I know I can do it. I'm a first responder. I'm an officer. I got to control it because I have control and I can get it done myself, because that's what we're taught. In the academy, you will win. You have to win. You can win. You just got to figure it out. Did you try those steps to do that at all without faith? Or did you not do any of that and just finally get to the point where you had to give it all up to God?
I think in hindsight, I didn't realize that I was out of control.
Oh,
I
gotcha.
didn't even recognize in that time frame in real time that I was out of control. I knew that there was a dissonance because, like I said, I was making poor life decisions and like still trying to hold on to my faith. And so there was like this weird push pull. And I don't think I even realized that I was spiraling until I was out of the storm. I think I was doing things just to try to white knuckle it through. But I could see it. I could see the decline happening. At work, I was showing up and forgetting my duty gear. Big no. I was getting behind on reports. I was getting, I was getting snappy with people, um, and it wasn't me. It wasn't who I knew I was on the inside. And that, I think, was because I had lost my connection with God, because that's always been part of me. And I think in hindsight, that was him showing me like, okay, this is you with me and this is you without me. Which one do you like better? And it was very clear that it felt a lot better when I was connected with him, but I didn't know how to get out of it. Um, and it wasn't until it came to like a breaking point that I was like, okay, let's let's rewind it, reel it back in, you know.
Yeah. So before we get to that breaking point, was there anybody? I think you had already referenced this way back when you said you weren't disclosing it to anybody. But was there anybody at work who you were close enough with that could point it out to you and say, "Hey, Amanda, you're not right. Like you are jacked up. This is not you. I don't know where you went or what you're doing, but this is not who you are. What's going on?" Or was there nobody that would step up and do that, or that you were close enough with that would do that?
Uh, Unfortunately, everybody that I was close with at work, close enough with that I would have revealed anything, um, they were all doing the same thing. Like
Yeah, that
everybody
sounds
was
like all of us at the police department, to be
right.
honest with you. So
Like,
it doesn't sound that
and
way out of
so
place.
yeah, and so there were people that may have if I allowed them to be close enough. But I kept those people at a distance because I knew that they were going to be a mirror for me. I knew that they were going to call me out on my crap. And so I was like, I'm good. And so this is a testament to the people that you surround yourself with really matters, because the people that I was surrounding myself with were also doing things that were not probably progressing them in personal growth, or maybe pulling them down bad paths. And and so there was nobody really standing on the side of the creek saying, hey, I've got a stick for you, you just grab onto it and I'll get you out of this mess. um Sorry for the hillbilly reference, but I just
No, it's
that was
fine.
what came to mind. And there were times that I even, that I joked about how bad things were. There was a moment in the squad room when, it was midnight and somebody said like, hey, what are you doing later? Because there were times where we would go out to the bars at 12:30 and close them down. And I said, I think I'm going to go home and eat my gun. And they all laughed because I made a joke. But like, we all know that dark humor is a coping mechanism. And I felt in that moment like I was screaming into the void, and all they heard was a joke. And I don't blame them for that, because that's what we do, right? Like we make sick jokes to make light of things, and try to uh, cope somehow. But that was a moment where I was like, nobody's coming to save me. this is this could get really ugly.
Yeah, what's funny, and I don't know if you'd agree with this or not, but I realized that more so outside of church, small group, friends that aren't police officers and first responders. You'll say stuff, you'll make jokes, and the looks on their faces, you're like, oh yeah, that should have been reserved for work because y'all ain't been there. So
This is not the right audience.
yes, yes, my wife has given me many a look during the day. Absolutely. So take me to okay. So absolutely, I've been in that river. We're all in that river, walking down that same path. What takes you from being part of that group? We all go down that path, but some of us then break off and have those breaking points sooner than others. Obviously, you had one. How did that look, or when did that ended up happening?
Well, I am a slow learner, so it took a few months of really being like in the muck and the mud. Uh, and so 2015, early in that year, um, I actually was named Officer of the Year. And so on paper, like things were going great. I was Officer of the Year. I had my own house. I had a dog. Like I was working out every day. I was in shape and all these things. So nobody was really checking in because I presented this facade that everything was great, which really allowed me to become a shell of myself behind closed doors. So I would come home and I was just, immediately I would go from uniform to like looking like I was homeless in my ratty old pajamas. And one night I remember distinctly the depression had set in pretty bad and I hadn't washed my dishes in a very long time. And I was eating cereal out of a gravy boat. Because that was the only container that was clean. And I was like,
Oh my.
this is getting bad. And I just kept white knuckling through it. And when you're underwater like that, you just can't see things clearly. So that went on for a few months. I had several moments where I really contemplated exiting this earth. And it wasn't until I met my now husband that I really, and once we started dating and got more serious, I really at that point had the courage to leave full-time law enforcement. But it had gotten pretty bad. And I think when he started to come around, I think I started to button things up a little more like, oh, somebody's going to see behind the curtain and
I was going to say, did he
realize,
come around while the dishes were stacked up and you're in your homeless gear and all this kind of stuff? Good for him. I mean, that's
no,
impressive. That's
no, I'm pretty sure I cleaned it up before I ever invited him over. But yeah, and it gave me reason to kind of get my stuff together behind the scenes. But um, and I was still obviously working full time, and so he had like this novelty of like, yeah, my girlfriend's this badass cop. That's cool.
oh,
And
nice. Yeah.
um, it was real cool. But then he was slowly starting to see um, what things really were like. He would ask me about my day, and I would tell him, and I would, say these god awful things that I witnessed or went through or whatever, just with a stone cold face. And he was like, that's not normal. Like, what do you like? And, and then I kind of started to let him in on some of my thoughts and things that I was experiencing. And um, he kind of looked at me like, that you don't have to live like that. Like, what are you doing this for? And it wasn't until that moment that I considered like, oh, yeah, I guess I don't. Like, I guess I could do something else. I hadn't really thought about it because you're so underwater that you just don't even have the awareness that you're under there. You don't have the awareness that like, oh my gosh, there's a different way of doing this. And so at that point, I had an interesting first vacation with him. We took a short little trip to Nashville, and on our way back on that Sunday, I was returning to work on Monday, and on our way back, I had a full-blown panic attack at just the thought of returning to work. And I had never had a panic attack before. And I was like, what is happening? Like, oh my gosh. And I didn't realize that it was my nervous system just screaming at me that it was time to be done. And so the next day I went to the doctor because I was like, something's wrong. Of course, they handed me some like prescription and was like, here's 2 weeks off. And I never filled the prescription, but I took the 2 weeks and I thought about it really hard. And after the first week, I typed up my resignation and took it into my sergeant, and that was it.
So you mentioned kind of when we talked before, there was a moment, and I'm going to assume that was the give up moment prior to the boyfriend. And maybe I'm wrong here, but where God really impacted you in a way that first made you stick around. And then I'm curious if you could give us a little bit of background on that day, the Bible, the verse, that kind of thing.
Mm.
And then what did faith look like in quitting the job? Was it all just kind of your boyfriend talking to you and you realizing? Was there any kind of prayer involved there, any kind of seeking or anything? Or was it really just, you just thought that was the right thing to do and I'm going to do it and, God will figure it out? Or what did that all look like?
So the one night in particular that you're talking about, um, it was really late into the morning. I hadn't been able to sleep. It was like 3:30 or 4 in the morning. And I was like, I should just go get my pistol and end it. I should just be done. Like there's no point. This is like, why are you even staying? There's no one's going to miss you. Like all the lies, right? And I kept kind of like scanning the room and looking at my dog, and like I was like, well, who's going to take care of him? That like, okay, maybe I should stay around, but like, he'll be fine, right? I'll just send a text and they'll take care of it. Like, it'll be fine. And over in the corner was propped up on this little stand that I had that was actually from my great grandma, was my great grandma's Bible. And it was given to me when she passed. And it was just this smaller little like pocket Bible, black leather, well loved. It was used a lot. Gold zipper with a little cross on it. And I was like, whatever. I had nothing to lose at this point. And so I went over to it and I picked it up and I started reading, because back in the day they used to write things in their Bibles, and special dates, birthdays, times where they prayed heavy, surgeries, wedding anniversaries, things like that. And so I was just reading through it, and it was like my mom's birthday was in there, and her surgery when she had her appendix out at 2 years old or whatever. Like, and I flipped to the back, and just very faintly in pencil, in like that old school cursive, it said, "The deeper the darkness, the further a little light will shine." And I was like, dang, really? Like, in that moment, like my whole body just flooded with this sense of gravity, and my body felt heavy, and it was almost like a shame, but at the same time it was like I felt supported. And I was like, and I kind of just clicked, like, what are you doing? Why are you even thinking this way? Like, and so I had the realization that at some point, many, many years ago, decades ago, God knew that I was going to need that message. And he spoke to her in some way, shape, or form and told her to write that in there. And because everything is his plan. And so in that moment, I was like, wow, how, if he can orchestrate that, that all of these pieces, and make those things happen in such a way that I was able to read that so many decades later in such a time of darkness, maybe he can help me through this. And he did. And that was at some point in 2015. I want to say it was like April or May. I started dating my now husband in the summer, but moving into that relationship, we talked about God a lot. We still do, but it was very upfront, and I will never forget. I think it was like it was the first time he slept over, and we weren't married yet, but but he came over after work, and we were getting ready to go to sleep, and I said, "Do you want to pray with me?" And he's like, "Yeah." and we prayed together before we went to sleep. And I was like, this, this might save me. And ever since, God has been first in our relationship and our marriage, and now in raising our kids. And I think that's the only way any of this has worked.
What do you think? And I just keep going back to the Bible, and I don't know, a lot of these interviews that I've had, people hear a voice, people feel a prompt. What was it about you sitting there and having those thoughts and seeing that Bible? Like, what can you describe a little bit more? Or maybe you can, I don't know. What made you want to read it? Was it just this inner, what brought your focus there?
Well, when I was sitting in the living room, and I was just kept looking around, like, give me a reason, right? Give me a reason to stay. And
You were asking
my
that
eye,
in your mind? Give me a reason to
uh-huh,
stay, or okay.
yeah. And my eye kept going in that direction and like catching it. Um, and it was almost like as if there was like a neon light on it and like I couldn't look away sort of thing. Like it just
Yeah.
kept drawing my attention back. And I think when I stopped to actually stare at it, I feel like I might have dissociated for a second because it was like it like zoomed in, but the walls like moved back and like it was like this
Like a
weird
movie, yeah.
it felt weird. Like it very much felt um like I was dissociating, but it was like it was coming towards me. It wasn't coming towards me, but it felt like it was getting bigger, and
Yeah.
it's really hard to explain. But I felt like this gravity, and it was almost, I don't even know if it was like a conscious decision. I just stood up and walked over and picked it up. Um, I mean, I remember going, really? Like, now you're here? And in hindsight, I realized he was never gone. He was there the whole time. I think, and this is after a lot of reflection. I was trying to solve my problems in a worldly way for a very long time, and I was creating a lot of distraction for myself. And I think he was waiting until I cut out the noise. And when I finally cut out the noise, that still small voice came through.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. When you talk to so many people, again, I have a few interviews, but just the number of people that I've talked to, that it's always exactly what your grandmother's sentence says. It's always in those darkest places that people are finally able to cut out the noise and realize that they can't control it. And then it's like, okay, finally, you've given up. Now I can come in and start to lead and guide, because you know that you know inherently you can't do it yourself.
Yeah.
Well, then take me forward a little bit. So we're with our boyfriend, who's now our husband.
Mm-hmm.
But before that, after you heard that voice, you meet this guy, you think about leaving law enforcement. Is any of that, again, faith prayerfully answered at all? Like, as in, yes, that was definitely a vision of, or maybe just all this past was that vision and that's what you needed, or what did that look like?
Well, when I left, like I had no plan. And so I was re- really kind of like putting my future, like really taking the leap and putting my future in his hands and saying, I trust you to provide. I trust you to God, not my husband, but I mean, he supported
Well, he,
me
he
too for a
provided
minute,
you with your husband, so maybe that was part of it. Yeah.
That's true. That is
Yeah.
true. I had, that moral support and all of that, but um and I was off for a month, and within that month, um I had somebody reach out and say, "Hey, if you're looking for a new job, you would be perfect for this victim advocate position. They're looking for somebody like immediately. And they're like, hey, you need to contact so and so. So I contacted that person, got an interview within like a couple of days. And then a couple of days after that, they're like, you're hired. Your start date is whatever. And I was like, whoa, that was
Yeah, we're
easy.
not we're not used to that in law enforcement. It takes 6 months, a year, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it was the same county. So like they had worked with me before
Oh,
and,
gotcha.
cause it was with the prosecutor's office. But it seemed like at that point, things started to become a little bit easier. During that month, I had um, what I now know is kind of like a restraint collapse. So I turned into Rumpelstiltskin, and for about 30 days, I slept 18 hours a day every single day
Wow.
because my nervous system was like, you've been going way too hard for way too long. We're going to recoup because you don't have to right now. And so I was very upset because it was all very involuntary. My body just would not cooperate. And so going back to work, and it was a whole different shift. It was a whole different scenario. Like that was a little bit of a struggle, but it seemed at that point that all of the next moves were set for me. Like the pavers were just being put out, and it was just all I had to do was have enough faith to take the next step. And I utilized the fact that I had like normal business hours, and I was like, I'm going to go back and get my master's degree, and I'm going to go do a 10-month yoga teacher training, and I'm going to, and none of it really made sense. Um, it all seemed so disjointed, and I was doing too much probably. And I was also planning a wedding. And so I was just piling all these things on because that's what my nervous system was used to. Um, but at the same time, I didn't realize what it was preparing me for. And now it's all crystal clear, um, because all of those steps got me to where I am now and being able to help other people and be a light for them and hope that, maybe they can see what God has done in my life and um, realize that if He can do it for me, He can do it for them.
I'm curious, and I don't know the extent of what you do exactly if you want to throw that out there, but I know you do coaching at least. As far as that goes, is it just for first responders or is it for a unique clientele that's kind of open, or what does that look like?
Yeah. So now I coach individuals, and that's just first responders. Um, but I do a lot of speaking engagements, conferences. I go to departments and agencies and do trainings. Um, what else? I have an app, a Lifesaver
Oh,
Academy app that's free.
wow.
Um, and it's got like breathing exercises and guided meditations and different things like that to help people like kind of calm their system. And then there's some trainings and stuff on there as well, but a lot of what I do focuses on burnout and nervous system regulation and all of that. But if people are open to it, I'm always willing to talk about my faith journey and how God has impacted me and what He could do for them. And if nothing else, even if they're not ready to have that conversation, sometimes just being supported and having somebody encouraging and kind come into their lives plants a seed, And so if I can be just a seed and then other people, water it and throw sunshine on it and all that, and eventually they find their way, then that was my role in their journey. So um, I'm still working on being more bold about my faith. But I really think that we are called to be the hands and feet of God here on earth. And I think it has to look however he wants it to look, whatever is it in his plan. Um, and so it could be as simple as just a smile, or, acknowledging somebody that usually gets overlooked, or whatever it is. That was, whatever that was his role for you in their life. So,
Yeah. Well, and kind of where I wanted to go with that real quick. I know you got to get out of here, so I'm going to be respectful of your time. But in the coaching, when you have those opportunities for the one-on-ones and you've dealt with first responders, have you found that they are more open to that aspect, spirituality, God, open to talking about that, open to dealing with that? Or have you found that it's kind of the opposite and they have to get into those darker moments like we've experienced before they're ever willing to be more open and kind of explore that?
I've experienced both. So, I would say for the most part, they're open to it. And I usually just, when I get to that part of, the overall wellness, because it really is physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, relational, all of the things. It's the whole person. Um, when I get to that part, I just ask them, what do you believe? And, you know, then I kind of gauge it from there. And if they want to talk about it, I'm open, and it's more of just like an open dialogue conversation, because I don't feel like I am in a position to be like a I don't even want to say religious guide, but I don't feel like I'm in a position to guide them on their faith, but I can tell them my experiences. I can tell them some of the things that I know, and they can certainly ask questions, and I can say, well, this is what I have experienced and or heard and or learned. Um, but I've also had people who were really indifferent, and they were like, yeah, I don't really know what I believe. And at that point, I'm not going to force it on them, because I don't think that that's helpful either. And I've also had the extreme. I actually had somebody that signed on with me. We did 2 sessions, and at the end of the second session, um, I asked him what he believed, and he said he was an atheist. And I was like, okay. And he's like, well, what do you believe? And I said, I'm a follower of Jesus, but to me, that doesn't affect what we're doing here. Um, does that affect things for you? And he said, yeah, I can't continue. And I said, okay.
Okay. And just because you said that, I have one last question that I remembered
Sure.
from some previous interviews that nobody has pushed back on or given me a different perspective. That atheist, or in your experience with who you've coached, have you ever had anybody who did not have that spiritual component, no matter if that was Jesus or whatever that looked like for them, who didn't have the spiritual component and still was able to come back from wherever they were at? If they didn't
No,
have the higher meaning, the higher calling, the higher purpose? No. Okay.
no.
That's the answer I
I,
always
I
get.
can
And
I can say that definitively, because if I were to take everybody that I've worked with, or people that I maybe have coached kind of informally or whatever, and draw a line of, they're doing better or they're not, it is a very clear line. And I I want to draw them in to Jesus and be like, this is it. This is
right.
the key, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I also believe that they have to be ready for it. And I don't know. That's something in my spiritual journey that I haven't figured out, you know, that line of how far do we push? Because I also think that some people get really turned off by it
Yeah.
if you push. Um, because I know I did when I was angry at God and somebody mentioned it, I was like, if he was so great, why would he have done this or that or whatever? Um, and I think that would push me further and deeper into that cynicism. Um, so, maybe that's one of my next steps in my spiritual journey or my journey as a mentor, is figuring out how to lift people up into his arms, um, without offending them or really, drawing that like cynicism out of them further.
Well, I have talked to a lot of people about that specific question, including pastors, including people who I would think would have had that answer. And the definitive, unanimous conclusion we always seem to come to is it's never on us. It's never on
Yeah.
us to push. It's never on us to get into place. God will get us to that place when it's necessary and if it's necessary. And clearly you've been there. You've experienced it as well. So just some pressure off of your shoulders on having to figure that out if it's something that, not that you can't figure out the good ways to help when that happens, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
not on us.
Well, and I appreciate that too. And I think, in hindsight, there are times where I'm like, why didn't he pull me out of that? Like I was trying to get to him, but then I look and I'm like, but my life, the decisions that I was making, he like, not that he was angry with me, but I wasn't taking the steps that I needed to take to get to him. And I think all of it obviously was part of the plan, but there were times where it was like I needed to walk over those coals to purify whatever was going on in my life. And although there were parts of it that really sucked, I had to go through all of that to get to this place. And I saw something the other day that said, and I'm sure you've seen it, it's circulated many times. But it was something like your struggle was harder because your calling was higher. And I was
Oh,
like,
that's got to be a
oh,
Facebook post or LinkedIn post or something. One of those.
something. It's a
Yeah,
meme that,
yeah,
has circulated around, and
yeah.
but it hit me and I was like, huh. But it's all in what we choose to do with it too, because there are lots of people that choose to stay in the suffering, and the answer is right there. You just have to let them in.
Wise words. Okay. Well, I know you got to run to some kids. Is there anything you would like to leave before I end up asking another question that going down another rabbit hole? Anything you want to leave for anybody that's listening that I might not have asked or something you had in your mind?
Nothing new, but I will put a lovely little reminder in there, for anybody that's listening. If you're in a dark place, the deeper that darkness, the further a little light will shine. So let it in.
Cool. All right. If before we run, if they do want to get a hold of you, if somebody listens to this and thinks, man, maybe I do need a life coach and she's my story or I can relate to her, where can they get a hold of you at?
So I'm on all the socials, well, almost all: LinkedIn, Facebook. I don't know if TikTok's going to be around much longer, but I'm there, and Instagram, and it's just AK Dazani. And or you can email me at akd@lifesaverwellness.com, or akdazani.com has all my stuff linked up as well. But I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you and talk about this stuff, because we need to bring it into the light much more than we do. So I appreciate it.
Awesome. We appreciate you coming on, and I will put some of that stuff in the show notes, at least the website and the email and that kind of thing. So if any of you are listening and didn't get that, just go to the show notes on the podcast and those links will be in there. All right. Thank you so much. We will talk to you again soon. I appreciate it. And go get to those kids.
I will.
Well, how'd you feel about AK? Have you ever held anger toward God, been depressed, lost, confused, burned out? How did you come back? Have you come back? Have you ever taken the time to cut out the noise so you could actually hear what God was trying to say? Maybe you heard him today. I hope so. If not, maybe it's time. Do you need help reaching out? Do you need help hearing him? Look, you can reach out to me, AK, or most importantly to God. He'll hear you and speak to you in whatever you are going through and wherever you're at. Again, AK's info is in the show notes if you want to reach out to her, along with mine, along with that link I talked about for the book and backstory that I have on Amazon, Confession of a Christian Fraud, so that you know where I'm coming from and why all this is here. And if you found value in this conversation, could you take a minute to save a life with me? Please, would you hit that review button so others can find this and hear the voice of God shine above the noise? Hey, thanks so much for listening. I'm not sure who we'll have next time, but I know it will be God appointed. So until then, I will catch you guys on the other side.